Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Christina Nosti, Events and Marketing Director at Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and tonight I'm thrilled to welcome you to our virtual evening with Camonghne Felix in conversation with Deesha Philyaw and Kiese Laymon to discuss Dyscalculia, a love story of epic miscalculation published by our friends at One World. Camonghne Felix, poet and essayist, is the author of Build Yourself a Boat, which was longlisted for the National Book Award in Poetry, shortlisted for the PEN Open Book Award, and shortlisted for the Lambda Literary Awards. Her poetry has appeared in or is forthcoming from Academy of American Poets, Freeman's, Harvard Review, Lit Hub, The New Yorker, PEN America, Poetry Magazine, and elsewhere. Her essays have been featured in Vanity Fair, New York, Teen Vogue, and other places, and she is a contributing writer at The Cut. Deesha Philyaw's debut short story collection, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, won the 2021 PEN Faulkner Award for Fiction, the 2020-2021 Story Prize, and the 2020 LA Times Book Prize, and was a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies focuses on Black women, sex, and the Black church, and is being adapted for television by HBO Max, with Tessa Thompson executive producing. Deesha is also a Kimbilio Fiction Fellow and the 2022-2023 John and Renee Grisham Writer in Residence at the University of Mississippi. Kiese Laymon is a writer bearing witness to the myriad forms of violence that mark the Black experience. Kiese's writing across genres is grounded in radical honesty and his perspective as a Black Southern man. He exemplifies a commitment to revision in his writing practice and through his capacity for frank self-reflection. Born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, Kiese is the Otili Schillig Professor in English and Creative Writing at the University of Mississippi and author of the novel Long Division, the memoir Heavy, and the essay collection How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. He was recently named a 2022 MacArthur Fellow. I am amazed to be in the company of these people. So welcome. Throughout this broadcast, please remember to post your questions for the speakers at the bottom of the screen. And thank you for purchasing your copy of Dyscalculia from Books and Books and for supporting independent bookstores everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Hello, hello. And welcome.
What up?
It's the party. It's the party. It's the party.
You almost missed the part. Oh, the hair matching the book type party. Let's
Come on.
Can we have honest talk before we begin? I texted Camonghne like 2 hours ago. Fam, I thought this was tomorrow. I wasn't texting you about it. And then you were like, I'm going to see you later tonight. I was like, oh, what? And I was, yeah, but thankfully, this book is in my bone marrow. So I can talk about it anytime, any place. And Deesh, didn't I hit you up being like, wait, we doing this? Yeah.
I was like, yes, we are.
No, sometimes the spirit has to get out ahead of you. So the spirit knew you needed a reminder, so it made you text me so that I could remind you.
There we go.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm just so happy to be here to talk about this book. Deesh, how you want to start, Deesh?
Can I start? Because my question is really about the beginning, and it we spring from your bio, Kiese. Can you repeat what was in your bio about revision?
Oh, I didn't write that shit out.
Okay, all right. Well, so you know that you talk about, you write about, you live that revision is critical. It is crucial to not only our writing but to our experience of this world as Black people. And Camonghne, you open Dyscalculia. The epigraph is a quote from Toni Morrison. I recognize failure, which is important. Some people don't. And fix it because it is data. It is information, knowledge of what does not work. That's rewriting. And so I wanted to know because, you know, I came back to this, you know, after reading it the book the first time, like, why this epigraph?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm reading the first part, and every breakup I ever had, I'm like, I remember being on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
but this epigraph seems somewhat disconnected. Can you talk about the connection?
Yes. Oh my God. I knew this was going to be just the best event ever. You asked the greatest questions. So part of what I'm trying to, part of the conceit of this book is this notion that when we take a look back at our heartbreaks, our various heartbreaks, no matter the nature of them, they tell us about ourselves. They tell us things that we needed to learn about ourselves, right? So that we love differently in the future. The most important time that you can spend after a breakup is with yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody always says that, but it's not for the, you know, some of the nomenclatures that we've heard, you know, well, you have to love yourself to love somebody else, whatever, put that aside. The point of that time after a breakup is so that you can take a look at what you want to revise in your next love, so that you can say, okay, I loved in this way before, and this brought me to this level of capacity, right? It either furthered my capacity for love or lessened my capacity for love. In the book, I have moments where I'm really transparent about some of the ways that I messed up, right? Some of the ways that I caused harm and caused pain. And looking back at that and looking back at that harm and pain that I caused, I'm able to both understand why I caused that pain, why it happened in this relationship, and understand the kind of relationship I need to be in so that that doesn't happen again. So it's data, right? It allows you to collect and recollect yourself, and then allows you to be different in a different situation in the future. And that's why that quote stuck out to me so much.
Thank you.
That's a beautiful question to answer, fam. I'm interested too in the, I mean, I asked you a question that was sort of rooted in what I'm about to ask you the last time we spoke, but this book is just unbelievably unsparing in the way you consistently allow like the speaker's body to consistently perpetually be like provoked and to be provoking. And most memoirs use some sort of cliched way of panning out, because writers can't sit in that shit too long because it hurts. And we've been told that readers can't either. But you do this sort of pan out where you pan out with a sentence. And one of the sentences you pan out with that I feel like is one of the dopest sentences in the joint. It's like, it was my mother who taught me Shakespeare, right? It's like a pan out. And that does what in other memoirs would often take a chapter, which would be trying to structurally get the reader to breathe, come back. You also use a ton of white space. So I'm interested in, can you talk about how you made the decision to stick with the body and the fractal breakup of you and the speaker and the partner, as opposed to like creating chapters that went completely different than what we would be used to? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of how I would answer that is, when I came to start writing Dyscalculia, I already knew what the metaphor was. I knew what the metaphor was. I knew what the mechanic of the metaphor and what it was going to be able to do, or what I wanted it to be able to do by the time I was done writing it. And so, especially in thinking about fractals and about how we use math as a metaphor to relate back to the body is the math, right? The body is the math in a person's individual experience, right? So even in talking about fractals and all of these different scientific terms, all of that stuff can be found in the body, right? And so it feels kind of useless, kind of silly to step too far outside of the body to make that metaphor happen when the metaphor is already happening for itself, right? And part of it too comes back to revision. Like, I knew what the metaphor was, but I also knew that in rewriting, I would be able to get more precise and get more specific about what kind of body language I'm talking about and what kind of mathematical language I was talking about. And in revision, that's where a lot of the white space came in. That's where, and part of building that white space in was trying to give the reader some space, right? To literally physically give the reader space in between each of these paragraphs so that it didn't feel as overwhelming. It didn't feel as heartbreaking. I wanted to write about heartbreak. I didn't necessarily want to break the reader's heart. So I needed to give them some space to take a step back away from me and from the book if it wanted to, without panning out too far and removing the body from it altogether.
I love that answer. Deesha, did your heart break reading this?
Now I'm thinking about the distinction that you just made. I don't feel like you broke my heart, but your words transported me back to every familial and romantic heartbreak I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
That I've ever had. And that whether that was a friend betraying me, whether it was my father's, all the ways he was lacking, whether it was romantic,
right,
all at once,
right,
all at once, because it just the memory, you relay a very specific breakup for you, but it evoked decades for me. And that's one of the many superpowers of this book. But yeah, Kiese. And so no, I don't feel like the book broke my heart. So you succeeded there, but I revisited so much of my own heartbreak, even though I'm probably like 20 years older than you. Different than your heartbreaks. But I wanted to talk to actually both of you about writing about your mothers, and and specifically something that I think Basi Ikpe said. I heard her say in talking about her memoir, I'm telling the truth, but I'm lying. And there are times where Basi writes about her mother. And she said, our mothers are contradictions. I don't know that this is in the book. I think this might have been in a conversation Bobsy and I were having. Our mothers are contradictions. And I feel like that was very real in both of your books. How do you, the easy question, the surface question is, how do you write about your mother? But below that, the subtext for me is, how do you write about these people who are our first worlds, who are such contradictions?
Good. You go ahead.
You don't want to go first?
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay, I'll go first. I was trying to not answer that. I mean, honestly, I will say, my mom was 19 when she had me, and understanding and learning to love the contradictions. I think that's why I became an artist. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not. The phone is in here. It's. I don't think that. I don't think that I would write what I write without my mama pushing me hard to be excellent. But I don't think I would write what I write without my pushing back against that, with wanting to be free. And I think that like my wanting to be free wasn't just my trying to be a hard-headed person. My wanting to be free was actually watching that model of a free Black woman who got punished for being free, but I was trying to be my mama. Do you know what I'm saying? So I just want to say, like, for me, like the contradictions or the, whatever you want to call that, the paradoxes of my Black mama, living with that, and having to react to that, I think made me an artist. What you think, Camonghne?
Yeah, I think the exact same thing. My mom and I have always had a very, very close relationship, and a relationship with a lot of contradiction, right? There are times where we are extremely close and very angry at each other, and times where we are not angry at each other at all and not necessarily very close. And what that's taught me is that the relationship with your mom is a lot like the relationship with yourself, right? The way that you kind of elevate your mom and put her on a pedestal, and the way that she lets you down, how hard she falls off of that pedestal when she's let you down, is very similar to the ways that we let ourselves fall off of that pedestal. And so similar to Kiese, I've watched my mom be a brilliant Black woman in a world that does not fuck with brilliant Black women, right? And does not want to let them be great. And I've made some of the same choices that my mom has made. I've also made distinctly different choices than my mom has made, some of which have come out of judgment, right? I've looked at some of the things my mom has done and been like, oof, I would never do that. I don't want to be in that situation, right? So I'm going to do something entirely different. And the reality is I end up in the exact same place. So in some ways, too, I think the way that the mother might function in memoir is that she winds up being another mode of calculation. We can kind of evaluate whether or not the subject or the person who's writing the memoir, we can identify whether or not they're being honest by how much they're willing to acknowledge that they are their mother, right? And that's part of what I wanted to do, is I wanted to set up this obvious parallel where in the memoir, I'm kind of coming to a realization that through the diagnosis of my bipolar, that my mom and I now have even more in common than we ever realized. But my mom is never going to acknowledge, right, that we both are suffering with this thing. That's just not going to happen. In some ways, similar to the ways that I don't completely acknowledge that I'm suffering with it, right, or acknowledge that I need support, or acknowledge that I'm disabled. So my mom winds up becoming a mirror, both for myself and for the reader, but more for myself than anything else. And that sentence where I say, like, it was my mother who taught me Shakespeare, that was a really groundbreaking thing for me to write, because I was, my mom literally physically, there's a book that I have that's called the Yale Shakespeare Collection. It's really old. It's from like the early 1900s. And my mom has been the owner of it since she got it from a professor. And she gave it to me not too long ago, but I grew up with it in our bedroom. My mom and I shared a bedroom for a really long time because we were poor. I grew up with it in our bedroom. And I realized a little later on that foundation of giving me Shakespeare obviously taught me drama, obviously taught me also all the things that Shakespeare teaches you, which is that humanity is incredibly diverse, and cannot be, and really hard to be understood, and incredibly complex. And it gave me a lens by which to see my own life, my own drama, my own stories, right? My own Shakespearean plays. And it made me feel a little less alone. And my mother gave me that gift, right? While at the same time, she gave me my bullshit.
That's what's up. Can I ask you both a question, Deesha? Is that okay with you, Deesha?
Sure.
So when Deesha and I met, Deesha had another job. Is it okay? Can I just say that?
You can talk about those people. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Deesha had this other job. People, and before Deesha became the Deesha everybody knows now, Deesha was like, fuck this job. I'm quitting this job, right? So Deesha was one of the only people, Deesha was the only Black person I have ever known in writing to have a job, quit that shit before, before. And I'm bringing that up to say, come on, like, there are a lot of people who expect you to do what you do in poetry, but expect it because of your job and what you know about politics to come with a completely different book, right? Like, I'm old ass G, and there was a point when I was hitting you all the time with political questions. I was like, wait, is this right? Tell me that. So I want to know how you actually hold a space, not just in your pen, but in your body for both of these labors. And do you consider them labors? Like, are they similar? Like the work you do in the world and the work you do in the page? I want to ask that for both of y'all.
Kiese, I quit my job.
So all that's left, Key, I'm just saying it. Somebody in this room need to quit.
Lose your job.
Well, that makes the question even fresher. Talk to me. Help, give me this. Yeah. I want to get there.
I quit my job because, I mean, listen, you know me pretty well at this point. I'm a real nigga. And I can't help it. I can't help it. And I think I knew that in publishing this book and in some of the other books that I'm working on, I would be having conversations with myself and with my audience that the people, if you follow me because you follow my politics, they may not be interesting questions to you, right? If you follow me because you want to know, who's going to run for Senate in LA and whether or not you should vote for them, of course I have an answer, right? But that answer is not going to be found in my literature. It's not going to be found in my books. And I wanted to be fair to people, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to give people an honest understanding of like how I'm coming through and how I'm pulling up. And even though I believe in duality and I certainly believe that if I really wanted to, I could continue to do both of those jobs. I just don't want to no more. I want to write books and I want to write the shit that I believe in, and I don't want to have to qualify it all the time. And also so much of my job at that, that job is giving my voice away to people who literally don't have a concept of how to develop their own voice. And there's something about that you get to a certain point and you're like, hey, you're not paying me enough for the premium that you're taking, right? I'm giving you a voice that is developed, that already has a base, that already has a following, and you're paying me maybe $100 an hour. That's just not enough. Nothing could be enough. So yeah, that's a big part of it. But I'm curious to see what Deesha thinks too.
I mean, I think in a way it was the same thing for me when it came to you can't pay me enough. You can't afford me, essentially, is what you just said, And for me, it was, it was the bullshit of the person that I had to report to. So then the cost becomes something other than money. Right? Then it's, what it cost me to be deferential, what it cost me to be diplomatic in the face of somebody who absolutely is antagonistic towards me. At a certain point, the paycheck and that, it just, that calculation was no longer worth it for me. And so, but I had given myself, I was like, I'm looking for other opportunities. I need to get to December of 2019 because it just was like end of the year. I'm going to make it to the end of the year. I'll find something else because like every Black person on the planet, what were we taught? You don't quit a job unless you have a job. Right. Sure. That is the rule. Right. And there was this day in August, and I remember it was like days before my church lady's manuscript was due to the publisher. So as Kiese said, my book hadn't even finished. And I was sitting there and I could hear, not really hear, but it was like a glass office that my then manager was sitting in. And I could hear my name and I knew she was on the phone with HR about me. And we had a call, we had a meeting scheduled at noon that day. And something in me said, I can't take another conversation of somebody picking at me. Our great, growing up, your people say, stop picking each other. That's what she would do. And I said, I'm not going to do it. And I will never forget, it was 11:27 a.m. before that noon meeting. And I just started packing my stuff. And I cleaned my desk. I cleaned everything up. I had, we have bags at work. I had extra bags. So I bagged all my stuff up. I walked out to the sidewalk. I sent a one sentence resignation email. And then I blocked both her numbers on my phone and went on with my life.
That's right. That's right. And the other part of it too, that I'll add to Key is like, and Deesha, you might be able to relate to this too. There's a certain, when your politics get to a certain place, there's something about managing people that becomes increasingly difficult for me to stomach.
That's real, man.
It is really hard to be a person who does not believe that labor should be extractive, walking around telling people this is where you need to be, this is what you need to be doing, right? And it got to a point where I really just couldn't do it. So I wasn't even sure if that I was being a good manager. Oh, you need to take time off? That's fine with me. Like, you need 5 lunches to feel better, take your 5 lunches, right? And even though I felt better about the way that I was interacting with people, because these are people, right? People who have to be workers. Even though I felt better about that interaction, I wasn't feeling any better about the holistic picture. I wasn't doing my job, right? And at some point when you realize that your job is inconsistent with just who you are as a person and the way that your ethics work, there's not a lot, to your point, Deesha, the cost out, it can't, it doesn't balance out.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. So this is a question that, we old heads, we be worrying about you, and y'all be worrying about. We take turns worrying about each other.
Yeah.
Especially when one of us puts out something that people are going to read as autobiographical or memoir-esque.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that I think people give me a lot, and I want to ask it a different way, is I want to say that, like, if I live my life to be written about the way you write about different people in this book, particularly your partner, like, I would feel so lucky.
Mm-hmm.
But so I want to start with that and say, how did you deal with the issue of consent when writing about a relationship that actually happened? I feel like that's a question that people are going to ask around, so I thought maybe we should ask it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll put it this way. This person knew for most of our relationship that ultimately I would wind up writing about this, right? And wind up writing about him. And because he was also an artist, we had talked about kind of like general consent stuff, like, if I write about this thing, are you gonna feel this type of way? You gonna try to get some money off me? Like,
No, that's right. That's what I'm asking. I hope you know that's what I'm asking. I'm like,
yeah. But what I did was, prior to it coming out, like months ago, almost a year ago, to my fiance's chagrin, deep chagrin, I met up with this person and sat them down and was like, here are like 5 key things about you that you will find in this book. And we went through them one by one. Is this untrue? Because I'm telling it this way. Is this untrue? Is this untrue? So really just trying to make sure that before it came out, I didn't feel like I owed him too much other than to agree that we both experienced it the same way, or at least that we remember it the same way.
Right.
And once I got that confirmation, I was like, cool. All right, well, this has been good. I'm gonna go about my business, right? Because I think when it comes to consent around memoir, and obviously there are other people too, like my mom, right? My mom is not going to read the book. She'll never read the book because I asked her not to, and she's going to respect that. But I've sent her screenshots of pages of the book, like, and let her read it, especially there's a page where I talk about going to the doctor and the doctor's telling her all this bullshit about what I may have and may not have, and her taking me home. Let her read that. And she was like, yep, that's exactly how I remember it. Right. So once again, trying to just make sure that I'm on the same page about memory. Do we remember these things in the same way? Because if we remember them in the same way and I was there, then I have as much ownership over it as you do. Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I don't know if I think we pause here for Q&A. Yvonne, let me know if I got that right time-wise.
I think so.
Okay. That was like...
Already? Damn.
I know, right?
Yeah, all day.
You still have some time.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Sorry, I was looking at my little itinerary thing here. All right. Well, since we have time, so I have a craft question, just kind of a basic craft question. It's 2 parts.
Yeah.
I think I know the answer to the first one though, is did this come together it's structurally the way we see it? And was there a part of this book where you were like, no, I can't put that in there. Okay, I'm gonna put it in there. Okay.
So there's a page at the very beginning. It basically starts off the book where I say, all right, so boom. And there's a page that I think comes right after it where I talk about on page 17 where I say he's leaving the home we share for the last time. That page in particular, page 17, I was not sure about it because some people have been able to pick up on it, but I think it's very subtle. It's a non-consensual sex scene. And again, going back to getting consent to even tell that story, I was like, do you remember this the same way I remember it?
Right.
And the answer was, mm-hmm. And I was like, cool, right? Mm-hmm. So that tells me that if I leave this out, then I am protecting that person over telling the story that I know to be true. Yeah, and that was really tough because I can't control the way that people are going to read it. There's a part of me that wants to put a trigger warning in it, right? Sometimes I want to put a trigger warning in the book and say that there may be some consensual, some unconsensual sex happening. But structurally, it felt dishonest to do that. And then generally, the structure, like, again, in rewriting it so many times, I got to a place where it just sung. And I really built this book the same way that I build poetry books, which is I take all the separate pieces, lay them out, and then, it's like playing solitaire. You arrange them, put them in different arrangements and see what you get. And this is a lot more pages, so I didn't have enough square footage to do that. But, just in sort of, I got myself a binder, I printed it 3 times, right? Just swapping in between the 3 and seeing what sung, seeing what stuck out. And I really wanted the metaphor to be the guiding pillar here. I wanted it for the reader to never forget that we're talking about math, and we're talking about the way that math manifests in the body and in the mind. And so it was important that there were some gaps that I left, right? Things where I wanted to over explain, but I had to hold back a little bit because it made sense. Stuff like that. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Deesha and I have talked a lot about village art and The Secret Lives and Gloria Naylor and really Morrison talking about, like, really giving us the push to write village art. So I'm interested in like your relationship in this book and as the author with the I and the we, right? Like, you carry so much I here, and and you were absolutely honest that, like, you are writing at least 2 and 4 Black girls. I want to hear how it feels to have this book out in the world, and at least from my vantage point, very early, know that there are so many fucking thousands of people, at least that I see, who have been like, that she got us. How does that feel? Because that's some shit, like, when what's coming out, like, it was memoir, so a lot of us be like, oh, come on, gonna be all right. But, like, people are, like, on that, like, they riding with you so hard, and because you love us and them, so Black women so hard and Black girls. But can you talk about how it feels? We haven't asked you that question. I haven't asked you that question. Does it? How it
feels? Yeah. It makes me really emotional. When I in my MFA program, my first year, I wanted to focus on the I as we. And it was like very, very rudimentary, very like baby poet, like, ooh, what does the I do versus what does the we do? But on a basic level, right, the I can be a stand-in for the we, right? And it should and kind of has to. And so as I was writing this book, I knew that I could say a lot more we. I could put a lot more we in it, the actual word. But it felt more clever and more interesting to just make the I the we, right? And believe that it could stand in for it. And I know that that's a pretty big risk, right? You run the risk of solipsism, and you run the risk of people not really being able to know just how wide your scope of affect is. But it feels good to know that I did it, right? Because so many Black girls Black girls in particular, and Black women are finding it and finding themselves in it without it being on the cover. I didn't have to say on the cover, this is for Black girls. It's not on the back. You don't find it until maybe, more than half of the way in. And I was really intentional about that. And my work has always kind of been like that, right? I want to always see how I can talk to my people without having to signal too big or too loud, right? Like, what are the subtle signals that bring your people to you without you having to yell Black at the top of your lungs? And there's nothing wrong with it. I love being a nigga who yells Black at the top of my lungs. but there's some subtlety that I think allows more Black women to come to it because they think it's their idea. Right? You're like, oh, this book couldn't possibly be for me, but it feels like it is. And it's like, I explicitly wrote it for you. And that feels good. I feel a little bit like a trickster. I'm like, oh, you found it anyway, even though I didn't say it. Mm-hmm. Oh, it looks like we got some questions now.
Oh wow. I mean, how do you feel about that first question?
Let's talk about it. I think it's a good precedent to set. So
okay.
My dyscalculia diagnosis is a part of my bipolar diagnosis. Most people, a good number of people who have bipolar, autism, ADHD suffer from dyscalculia, similar to the way that a lot of people suffer with dyslexia. It's actually a very common learning disorder. And part of the reason, I opened something up by accident. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about dyscalculia in this book is because it was a very useful metaphor for me. It was a very useful metaphor for me to understand my relationship to math and a way for me to decontextualize my relationship to math and make it about something else. But I don't think that I wrote this book as a way to like bring awareness to dyscalculia, the learning disorder, right? I think that through the process of reading this book, one becomes more aware of it. And I'm excited that there's a conversation happening, but it is not a book about the learning disorder as much as it's a book about the way that I process that learning disorder and the way that those metaphors show up for me in my everyday life. And it's also just as a person who, again, as you read in the book, really loved math at some point, it's an opportunity for me to refocus my math anxiety around on a central point and be able to really talk about where that anxiety comes from and where that inability to learn math came from, because it wasn't just a random thing that happened to me, right? It was trauma induced. It was, induced by mental health and mental illness. And in order for me to tell this story, I needed to be honest about those things, and making it the title. This was always the title, even in its first draft. And it's because, I don't know if it's that spirit told me, but this is the metaphor. It needed to be decontextualized for me to really understand how it was affecting me. And so selfishly, the title is more for me than for anybody else. And I do feel a little sad maybe or frustrated that, because I know that there are so many people with dyscalculia who are just so happy to see something in mainstream culture that is about it. And I sort of feel bad because it's not really about the disorder, right? You're not going to get a lot about the disorder, but it also is about the disorder. And You'll get a lot about the disorder if you can look at it as a metaphor and not necessarily as a diagnostic tool. Yeah.
We got I want to make sure I'm okay asking these, but this person says, is there anything about love or heartbreak, romantic or otherwise, that isn't explicitly stated in the book that you want people to walk away with? That's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. So other than what you wrote, what else you want people to walk away with?
Well, I will say this. I made the decision not to end the book on a new relationship. And that felt too easy. It felt too easy to end the book by being like, and I found love again, because then it's just a love story, right? And then it pegs the author's growth and and an ability to grow, capacity for growth on whether or not she has the capacity to be loved. And that felt incongruent with what I was trying to say about the way that love works and worked. And I'm curious about what, like, how it feels and how it feels to read that in comparison to how it feels to read other books or maybe other romance novels where at the end of a heartbreak narrative there is a new love. But I thought that it was important, especially in thinking about young girls who might be reading this and young women, young people, excuse me. They need to know that healing is not just a pathway to your next relationship. That there are other reasons to heal than to find love again.
Yeah. I love that question, actually. It's like Lemonade. You know how Formation was like technically the last song on Lemonade because they put it at the end? But people never see it that way.
Exactly. It was actually the first song on Lemonade because that's the single that she dropped. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know. Do we want to talk about any of those other questions, y'all?
Yeah, I think there are more diagnosis
questions.
That's what I'm
saying. Maybe
not.
Want
to touch on that.
I can touch on it a little bit. The way that it affected me when I was in school. I mean, the way that it affected me, it's really easy to understand when you think about the way that Black girls are criminalized in general. And so, you know, I was not supposed to be a badass kid, but I ultimately ended up being a badass kid because that was the way that I was labeled and it was the way that I was treated. And to be honest, I had more in common with the bad kids than I had in common with anybody else because of that treatment. And so really not being able to do math or struggling to do math was the beginning of the end for me in terms of having a healthy relationship to my education, having a healthy relationship to school. Once I started to fail classes, there was no more interest in me in preserving my innocence, in preserving my health, my safety. Teachers just kind of decided that I wasn't worth their time. And a lot of the feedback that my mom would get would be like, she's really, really smart, but doesn't stay on task. She's really smart, but, refuses to do work. And one thing I think about all the time is I remember a teacher saying to the class, well, I'm just going to teach the kids who want to learn.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember thinking about that and endlessly thinking about it because I was like, what kid doesn't want to learn? Every child wants to learn. And I think I became indignant after that, like indignant on behalf of the other students that I saw around me, the other kids who struggled, because I knew that I wanted to learn and I knew that there was something in my way and that no one was interested in figuring out what that was but me. Yeah. So it really tarnished my relationship to school and solidified my relationship to authority. I don't believe in or trust authority because this was a part of my life where authority was supposed to be, these teachers, and they basically left me hanging because it was too difficult to figure out what was going on. And I don't overlook the fact that if I went to a more privileged school, if I wasn't in public school, if I went to school with white people, that it would have been easier for that to have been discovered. But at the same time, I know Black girls who went to private schools on the Upper East Side who got treated just as badly as I did in public school for the same conditions. So what it means to be a disabled young person with a learning disorder in school, especially something like dyscalculia, it was very painful. And that's one part of the reason why I wanted to write this story for young people, especially young Black people. I wanted them to know that this treatment, that somebody sees it and can put it into words, and that they're not out of their minds for feeling the way that they feel about authority.
One of the things I wanted to ask is about like the way you handle the mundane, like craft wise, because like this book starts, to me at least, in this weird kind of misdirecting way. But when I Boom starts, it's just so forceful that as a reader, you're like, I'm like, what the fuck is she gonna do with the mundane? Like, you find ways to comically explore the mundane. But I want to ask you about your relationship to comedy in this heartbreaking exercise and in this book. Like, can we talk about that? Because I feel like that's ultimately, like, for me, that's what make this shit like so fucking classic. And I hope people talk about the comedy in this book in like 4 or 5 months. But can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, no, for sure. A big part of how I wrote this book is that I wrote it the way that I talk, and I write it the way that I tell stories. And I have a pretty interesting way of telling stories. People have always told me this, and I pretty much always, especially with my friends, start with something like "I Boom" or "Girl, let me tell you," or this shit, right? Like
always here, right?
Always some sort of exclamation. And part of how I tell stories is with a lot of humor, right? I like to make people laugh. I think it's funny to tell a difficult story with humor, to tell somebody about your heartbreak and be like, but bitch, let me tell you how this man actually dragged my ass. Right? That's a lot more interesting. And also this, right? I am used to writing about trauma, thinking about trauma, from a professional place and from a creative place. And part of what I meant when I said, like, I don't want to break anybody's heart, I also didn't want to re-traumatize my readers, right? Like, you don't need to be traumatized or re-traumatized to get what I'm trying to put down. All you have to do is be present. And when you're telling somebody a story and they're present with you, even when it's starting to go left and they're like, oh my God, this feels harrowing, and you throw in that quick exclamation or you throw in that quick joke, automatically that lightens the story and it lightens the space and allows them to continue to be present. So I thought of it as a mechanic and as a tool, really, right? Like, or a mechanism and a tool, really wanting to be able to give people as much relief as possible, whether it was the white space, whether it was just the ability to have a laugh or a joke. It felt like a necessary thing to offer the reader to justify so much of the heaviness that surrounded the humor.
Yeah. I feel that. I love that. Oh, we got more questions. Yeah, is there a particular part of the book you're most proud of putting in and thus out there? Is there a particular part of the book are you most proud of putting in and thus out there?
I think, honestly, I'm really, really proud of the science, and I'm really, really proud of the philosophy. I come from a philosophy-heavy household. My mom is a member of the African Philosophers United. It's all African Americans, but I don't understand.
I thought you meant African with a K.
No, well, it is. I think it is African with a K. But I grew up going to these meetings every Sunday since I was a kid and being genuinely like impressed and excited about some of these essays a lot of folks were bringing to the table, because all of it was trying to explore the epistolary life of Blackness, right? And trying to explore the ontological life of Blackness. And so the philosophy parts, I know it's something my mom would be proud of. She hasn't seen yet, but really being able to, that's what good philosophers do, and what good philosophical writing does is that it takes this huge macro idea and then it whittles it down into something that is directly related to your lived experience and to your ontological condition. And I really wanted to try to display the ontological conditions of both myself, the other characters in the book, and then of heartbreak at large, right? Like, what is the sort of like social ontological condition of how we all love and how we get our hearts broken, and being able to use the Pythagoreans, and being able to use just like all of the good shit that came out of that era. Really, I impressed myself. So
I want to talk about that a little bit when you talked about, how we think about heartbreak. because I think I've been thinking about how in terms of music, you know, how people are, you know, I'm specifically thinking about R&B right now, and how people are singing about heartbreak or not now, or even in hip hop. Hip hop deal with heartbreak anymore? I don't know. And so I want you to talk a little bit about that in terms of what has shifted. Like, there's certain things about heartbreak maybe that are universal, and other things that are of our moment that you know. You want to talk? If you can talk about that, and also what were you listening to when you were writing?
That's a great question.
Well, I'll answer the last question first.
Okay.
I wrote to a lot of SZA, in part because some of the bigger moments of the heartbreak happened when SZA's early album first started to come out, like the single started to come out. Like, why you bother me when you know you don't love me? That one came out during one of those scenes. So I heard that song for the first time during one of those scenes. And part of what I love about SZA, and I think she does exceptionally well, is that she is really invested in the different notes of heartbreak, right? She can write many albums about heartbreak, and you can't even be mad at her, right? I remember when she dropped the recent album, there were a couple girls on TikTok who were like, oh, like she's not healed and it's like not okay. And I thought about it for a second, and I was like, does one need to be healed necessarily to like make art that is valuable? And also, like, does one have to be unhealed to continue to talk about what hurts? And I think she does an excellent job at least giving us that question to ask. And I wasn't sure for a second. I was like, damn, maybe she hasn't grown. Maybe that is a bad thing for her. And then I thought about my own work, and I was like, I've grown like shit. I'm engaged. I would never write this book again if I needed to, right? But I still feel, you can still feel the notes, right? And the spectrum of the notes of pain. So that's what I listened a lot to. I listened to a lot of R&B in general. Tamar Braxton, that's somebody who can sing down when it comes to pain. A lot of old Brandy. It's hard not to listen to Lemonade. It's real hard not to listen to Lemonade when you're writing something like this, right?
Yeah.
That was all I listened to when I wrote my last book.
Yeah, exactly. Like literally just on repeat. And I think, like, to answer your question about where the music is, and I think there are so few people and artists outside of Black women making R&B who are interested in owning humiliation. To write love and to write about heartbreak, you have to own your humiliation. I mean, think about like Luther Vandross, think about the old heads. They were telling you how bad it hurt and how bad this man hurt me for real. And I was boo-boo the fool, and I'm still boo-boo the fool, and I might remain boo-boo the fool for this man. But the music, a lot of the music that we have now, especially in hip hop and R&B, I'm sorry, not R&B, especially in hip hop, it is incredibly empowered, right? Which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with empowerment, but it's so empowered that it can't do anything else, right? It's a lot of, I'm a bad bitch and period, and I'm a bad bitch, period, right? And it's like, but how did you, I want to know about the process, like how did you become said bad bitch, right? And also, like, a lot of it is mirage, right? It's like, I'm going to project the image of being a bad bitch so that I don't have to be vulnerable in my work and in my music. And I personally am not very impressed by it. I listen to it. I can groove. I can get down. Did I just say groove and get down?
That's like Gen X. You working with us?
That was real Gen X's right there.
You ain't been lying about that either. Let me find out, cool.
Oh my God. I've been listening to the old heads, I told y'all. But yeah, that's how I feel. And the R&B really just continues to impress me. I mean, if you just go to like an R&B playlist on Spotify or whatever, you'll find all these new young ladies, Money Long, a couple other folks who are really taking, Kalani, right? Like really taking it seriously and following what the folks who came before them did. And that's really exciting to me. I love R&B.
There was the last.
We have, sorry.
You got it.
I was going to say we got some more questions.
Yeah.
Is there a particular part of the book that you're most proud of putting in there in the book and thus out there?
I think that was a science answer.
Yeah.
Oh, was that?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I asked it wrong. I think I did the teacher thing and corrected the shit, so it sounded different than it looked. My bad.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? You take that, Kiese.
Okay. I found you being, this is a question, really, really parenthetically brilliant. That's so interesting. Somebody said really, really in parentheses. I found you being really, really in parentheses brilliant, speaking on political subjects of e-viewing. Will you collect and publish your political ideas?
Yeah, so the book that I'm working on next is called Let the Poets Govern. It's another book where the title is not what it sounds like. Somebody's going to take me to jail for this. What? And a lot of it is me publishing some of my political essays and really reflecting on what it means to be at the end of the world and what it means to try to tap into indigeneity in order to not just survive this very end, but for the people who are going to be left behind, what kinds of texts, what kinds of language do they need in order for us to not end up where we are at now? What if we're going to start over with a new world? What does it mean to equip people, whatever these humans will be, with the language that they need, the political language? And it also is me taking a look back at some of the language that we've used historically to create laws and to create systems of laws, and really analyzing them, like talking about why the Papal Pontifex of 1455 is the document that literally started slavery, and how the language that's inside of it is more of a curse than it is anything else. Right? Understanding that language has a kind of magical quality, and that it can work for both evil and good. So, yeah.
Can I ask one question about what does our being at the end of the world like? Like, would you have written this book were we not at the end of the world?
I don't think so. I think that part of what I'm trying to manage or come to terms with is this like deep anxiety that I feel about the end of the world, right? And my biggest concern is not just like, oh, well, how are we going to, what's going to happen to our houses? And that's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is like, what's going to happen to all this thinking, right? To all this thought, especially thinking and thought over the last 30 to 40 years that has been moving more towards a more equitable world, moving us away from systems of capitalism and towards systems, I don't want to identify any particular one because they all have flaws, but moving us towards systems that actually allow for humanity to be the centrifugal principle of execution and not something else. So no, I don't think I would have written it if we weren't at the end of the world. And I think a lot of people are writing not similar books, but are writing towards the end of the world because of that anxiety. And I'm not afraid or ashamed of that because I'm a millennial, right? And if we're not sort of like sitting in and analyzing that anxiety, like when is it going to happen? Yeah. Oh, we can do one last question.
Okay, so this is from Lacey Ward. What has been the most rewarding feedback you've received so far? I guess that's what we talked about, or any feedback that has surprised you. That's a great question. Yeah.
I'm most surprised by how people have been able to find and identify the humor. I think that I'm funny. And I think I'm pretty funny, but I'm not always sure that my humor comes through. or that it's super legible. And a lot of people have been like saying to me at the book release yesterday, people were like, this is really funny. Yeah. And I was like, damn, I thought it was funny. I didn't think it was really funny. That makes me really happy. So
really,
yeah.
Really, really.
Yeah.
That
really,
boom. I think that's that boom that like, I think that boom is doing so much work, fam. Like for real. It's so smart to do. And where it comes in the book, it's just
it's the best.
It's perfect.
It just it is emblematic of how multifaceted that felt like a we. That was definitely a we, because you're giving Pythagorean stuff, and then boom, and it's like, okay, this is us. This is who we are. This is how we show up in the world with all of our many faces, all of our many talents, all of our many moods, and you capture that so beautifully with Ivan. So thank you.
I'm trying to come in with all the questions at the end. Okay, so all right, how do we make noise? What? How do we make noise for your book? Make noise. Woo! Read the mug. Yeah. Read it first. Read that mug first, and you gonna make noise. Like, right, Deesha? You read this book.
And also, if there is young people in your life, and by young I mean like 21 and under. Well, first give it to anybody, but specifically the 21 and unders, your college and high school. My daughter who is now 19, she would have been 17, I guess, when I had the advanced copy. And it was I think it was a white cover, but she picked it up and she has since read it 3 times.
Wow.
So I promise you that if you give this book to a young person, 1, it's going to spark conversation. 2, get them their own copy, because they will take yours, because ask me how I know. My 3rd copy of this book. But I think that's part of it, is specifically gifting it to young people for any occasion that graduation, whatever. That's my suggestion on how to make noise. But what y'all think?
I agree.
And
please, like, talk about it on social media, especially after you read it. Buy it for the young people in your life, all that stuff. Just talk about it, buy it, whatever you can do, whatever feels good, feels right to you. And the audiobook, which I really enjoyed recording. So if you like your books on audio.
And gift it to as many Black boys too as in the world.
Yes.
I hope it's okay for me to say that. I hope.
Yes, it is.
We need that.
We need that.
I did a reading in a workshop at a prison this morning with some incarcerated Black men, and they were halfway through this book, like reading it by themselves, halfway through this book, and then we wrote love poems.
Oh,
is this for Freedom Reads?
Are you Freedom Reads?
Yeah. Where did you go?
We're all ambassadors. I went to Arlington County.
That's where I went too. That was
yeah. It was amazing, and they really responded to the love. And what they responded to is that they wanted to see Black men being talked about in that vulnerable way, and showing the way that this Black person was able to love me. And I thought that was really profound.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Thank you, Camonghne. Like, I don't know. I feel like we like auntie and uncle and shit, but
yes,
okay,
we're always checking in. How's baby Ka doing?
Always. But beyond that, like you brought texture to my life when I really needed it. When I read this book, you made me see myself in ways I hate to see myself, but ways I hope to see. And you just made me a better writer. You know what I'm saying? Like, reading this book is hard to not become a better writer. You did some shit we haven't seen, and that to me is love and life giving. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Key.
And I'm peeping the audiobook when shout out to you as a member of our Lit 16 cohort when we did our event and you read. People were wrecked in the good way. People were talking about that reading. So the audiobook is a real gift that I can't wait to give myself. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And thank you to everyone in the audience, especially those who've left really, really lovely comments. I really appreciate it. Okay.
We're snapping. We get on. What we doing?
Yeah, we're wrapping up. I mean, we could dance. We could sing.
Dance break? I don't know.
No.
Is there a playlist online?
Yes, there is a playlist. It's on Spotify.
Okay. So they just look up Dyscalculia?
Yeah, just look up Dyscalculia. Okay. I will send it to you, Deesha, because it's actually pretty good. I'll send it to you too, Kate.
Thank you.
Got some Fifi Dobson on there, you know?
All right. I guess we just say bye. I thought
Okay.
Well, thank you.
I thought Yvonne was coming back. But so
thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Books and Books. I love Books and Books.
Okay.
Thank you.
Love you both.
Right. Peace. Love you too.